They're back, people. That's right. This album review, which, by the way, this is the first time in a little while I've done an album review. I apologize for the lack of the album reviews in the past couple weeks. I've just been very busy with the Walmart Cup Series because I'm wrapping up Season 4 as we speak with just a few races left to go. But I have been trying to check out new albums, and before I get into this one, I do want to say a couple albums that I did check out some songs off of, and I just wanted to come on and say that a couple of them were very disappointing, particularly the Obituary album. Here I thought I was looking forward to a phenomenal return from Obituary, but it turns out their new album, Inked in Blood, was just very, very disappointing. Wasn't really worth finishing up or reviewing because I was very disappointed by a couple songs off it. So there you go. There will be another album review coming after this pretty soon, and that's the Dragon Force album review for Maximum Overload. But with this album review, the reason why I said they're back, the return after 19 years, 19 long fucking years, at the gates, the legendary melodic death metal Gothenburg band comes back with a brand new album. This album called At War with Reality. Where to begin? Where to begin on this album? This album is about 45 minutes long, 13 tracks, and wow. We kicked off the album with a Swedish kind of like spoken word, epic kind of thing, intro. I'm going to try my best to say this. El Altar del Dios Desconocido. I probably destroyed that, and somebody's going to be like, you're a fucking asshole. Well, I deserve it, because, yeah, I screwed that up. But it was like an odd intro to get things going. This is why I thought this was probably the weakest track of the album, the absolute weakest track, because it was just very odd. But after that, we get into the muck of the album, the songs that really, really propelled this album straight forward. We kicked it off with Death in the Labyrinth, 2.5 minutes of sheer melodic death / thrash. I mean, you got the sound of a melodic death metal band with that speed and intensity of a thrash band, and in fact, that was one of the major foundations for melodic death metal, or Gothenburg metal, whatever people want to call it. It's because of that thunderous pace with the drums, particularly, and some of the guitar riffs are very thrash orientated. But but it's also the rhythm section of death metal with the bass and the drums being fast. But with the melodies on the guitar is just absolutely amazing to hear in a melodic death metal band. And At the Gates, in my opinion, was one of the first and the best during their time when they were around in the 90s to do this kind of idea. So after Death in the Labyrinth, we got into more crazy songs, but before I get into that, I forgot to mention that since it's been 19 years since Slaughter of the Soul, their all-time classic record, Slaughter of the Soul, came out in 95, you would begin to think, well, how much has the band changed? Have they changed at all? What tricks do they have up their sleeve? We'll talk more on that near the end of the review, but excuse me, but then we get into the title track, At War with Reality, and this, just like Death in the Labyrinth, very phenomenal tracks, because it just has that real beauty to it with the guitar melodies and the riffs and the aggression, the drums, and just everything about it. The Circular Ruins was one of those interesting tracks, because it kind of they changed the pace up on me a little bit on that track, where there would be some mid-tempo to some slower stuff on this, and also in a bunch of songs later on. But this was one of the things that I think At the Gates was was praised for was the fact that they would be able to play mega fast, but then play mid tempo to mega slow and change the pace up on you, and it would work and it would fit into a song. Heroes and Tombs was a track that had that real solid melody behind it, and it was more of a mid tempo track, but it was a great track as well. I mean, just the beauty behind it was just one of a kind. I just could not stop bobbing to it. It was just great. Conspiracy of the Blind was one of those interesting, thought-provoking kind of tracks with the lyrics behind it, where it was just wow. But the music was still just great, good old-fashioned At the Gates that we knew, and it was done really, really well. Order from Chaos was another really good track that I really, really liked on this album, because it had that interesting little aspect to it where it just had that charm with the drums particularly, as well as the screamy vocals that Thomas Lindberg was able to do on the whole album, but also with this song, was able to get his voice up there with the screamy death metal, black metal kind of vocal approach to him. The Book of Sand, The Abomination was one of those kind of interesting songs, and it was one of the longer tracks of the album at 4.5 minutes. It definitely showed that At the Gates was able to not only just play very fast, but they were also to play with musical chops. The Head of the Hydra was one of those interesting songs because it fit. It's a song I think would perfectly fit the first Captain America movie because of the whole Steve Rogers versus the Hydra stuff. This was a track that would fit for that kind of an idea because it kind of has that little bit of an idea behind it where it's talking about Hydra and the Red Skull or whatever. I don't know if that's necessarily true or not, but if it was, wow. Interesting track, and I really liked it. City of Mirrors was the shortest track of the album. That wasn't the first track. The first track was a little over a minute. This was a little over 2 minutes. This was just pure, unadulterated, fast metal. And wow, it just like blew my head out of my body. Eater of Gods was one of those crazy tracks, another really, really intricate track where there's some technical progressive stuff going on that track. Upon Pillars of Dust was another one of those kind of like pace changers. But we get to the finale track, The Night Eternal, where they really, really went all out with the slow and the fast, the aggressive, the beauty, the technical, the progressive. They just went full bore with that closing track. It was just beautifully put together. The instrumentation on it was great. The acoustic guitar fit that track. And then we got to the end of the album right there. So to answer the question, does At the Gates still have relevance and can they still go? After listening to this album, hell motherfucking yes. At the Gates is back, and back with a vengeance. While this album isn't as good as Slaughter of the Soul, it's up there, because this album just had so much interesting aspects going on. You have that kind of that guitar melody sense that you would hear from a typical melodic death metal band, but with At the Gates, because they were one of the first bands to really do this and really just made it into something that would be absolutely incredible, even though they didn't get much attention during the time it was constructed. When later on, when the metalcore bands started to listen to some of this stuff, then that's when people started to be more aware of At the Gates and realize, hey, At the Gates was one of those classic bands of the genre of death metal, because they were able to take death metal, mix it with melody, and put it together. And this was all after the expansion of death metal, where in the beginning you had more the jazzy, more progressive death metal bands like cynic and atheist, and even death was going in that direction. You would have the brutal style from Cannibal Corpse and Deicide, the blackened style from bands like Behemoth and Acker Cocker or whoever, Belphegor. You would have the death grind kind of vibe that you got from the 90s Napalm Death catalog, Carcass on their first album, and also Repulsion's Horrified album, and then also you had the Death and Roll with Entombed and 6 Feet Under. But then you had this melodic style that's probably, along with technical or progressive death metal, being my favorite style of death metal, because it just takes a lot of influences from death metal, new wave of British heavy metal, a little bit of black metal with the vocals a bit, thrash metal for its speed, and power metal for its epic quality. And they put it all together into melodic death metal, and it's an innovative style of metal for that time. Nowadays, it got a tiny bit repetitive, only for the reason that a lot of metalcore bands started popping up out of the woodwork, kind of copying what was done by those Gothenburg bands, but kind of do that within their own work and make it their own sound, pretty much. But nonetheless, when it comes to melodic death metal, At the Gates, one of the progenitors of the style, and they were still able to play it and still make it sound fresh, to me at least. High praise to this album. Now you ask, is this the album of the year? Did it top Accept Blind Rage? Well, it came close. Very, very, very close. It's not album of the year, but it's up there. We will see this album again when we get to the album of the year list. But as of right now, this album is definitely the very close number 2. 9.75 out of 10. High praise to this album. The guitar melodies were absolutely beautiful. That aggression that they were able to show back in their early material in the 90s is prevalent on this disc. The drum work I was absolutely amazed by. The production was great. The vocals from Thomas Lindberg, while they've aged a little bit since he's older, he could still scream his head off. Solid return to form to their original sound, the early melodic death metal sound. But also, they are back with a vengeance. 19 years of dormancy, and they just put out a phenomenal album. While not nearly as good, not as good as Slaughter to Soul, but I would say maybe their second best album. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Rock on!